Alright, welcome to Fantasy Talk. Today I'm going to be discussing Book 1 of the Kingkiller Chronicles, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. The Name of the Wind. This is day 1 in a 3-part telling of Kvothe's story. So Kvothe killed his king like a few years ago. I don't really know the timeline of this book. And this entire series of a planned trilogy is basically just him telling you how he went from a child in the troupe of traveling performers known as the Edema Route, and how he came to become this renowned figure of legend who killed this king and started a war that is currently ongoing in the current timeline. So what makes Kvothe special? Why do we want to read a book that is an intimate close-up of how he got from point A to point B? He's engaging and complex because Kvothe is brilliant. About as brilliant as anyone can possibly be. Whether it's arts or science or magic, what have you, he can do it all. But he is a dumbass, and that's what is really cool about his character, is that any of the trouble that he gets into is really his own fault. He makes a lot of really bad choices that really, as the reader, you're just like, oh, that's not gonna be good. But he's just so desperate to keep going, to keep surviving, to keep staying where he needs to be, to find these answers that he's looking for, that you understand why he's doing these things, what his motivation is to make these hard choices that probably aren't going to pan out. But he has to make them because he has no other choice. Another thing about Kvothe that is extremely compelling is just that some bad things happen to this guy and around him and because of him and to him. We can all understand and empathize with people who have been through severe trauma. But it's not just that he goes through this trauma. This is where the writing of Patrick Rothfuss really shines. His prose accentuates the actual story elements. The beats that Kvothe goes through are enriched by this gourmet language that just draws this emotion out of the reader. Not only do you just identify with Kvothe as a person, you can't help but feel chills and deep, deep, deep emotion when the prose is like poetry pulling it out of you. So I'm going to read from the book. This is a part where Kvothe is talking about how he doesn't want to borrow money because he's poor and he's trying to figure out a way to be able to get enough money to continue doing what he needs to do. So borrowing from a friend seemed like the simplest option, but I valued my handful of friends too much to risk losing them over money. As my father used to say, there are 2 ways to lose a friend. One is to borrow, the other to lend. Besides, I did my best to keep my desperate poverty to myself. Pride is a foolish thing, but it is a powerful force. I wouldn't ask them for money except as my very last resort. Poetry. I just got chills. So, let's talk about some common criticisms of this book. One is that Kvothe is unbelievably way too good at everything he does, and that it's kind of annoying that he doesn't really seem to have too many flaws or anything that he isn't just naturally good at. Well, my pushback on that would be we kind of have to view Kvothe as like a Tom Holland who is just good at everything he does. I mean, if he touches it, it turns to gold. I mean, just look. Incredible. He's just a really talented individual. I mean, they exist. It's not that unrealistic. But another thing we have to remember is who's telling the story. He is. And he even admits that he makes things up to make himself look better. That's really human, and I really like that aspect that, yeah, he's telling the story. He's going to try to make himself look better, and what do you expect? Another criticism of this book is that it objectifies women, and yeah. Now, you can make the argument that because he's telling the story, of course he's going to make it where all the girls like him. Still, it's something that I know that Pat is still growing on because I've seen and heard interviews from him where he's been called out on these things and aspects of his book, and you can tell that it's still a process that he's working through, but I do think he's trying to get better, and so I hope as he continues to write that we see some improvement with how he portrays women in his stories. So let's talk about the plot. Just know that if you're a reader whose main focus is plot and main events and epic scale story, you're really not going to get that in this story because that's not what this is trying to do. There are some really epic moments, but overall you are in a day-to-day intimate setting with Kvothe, discovering who he is at such a nitty-gritty level. That is what the story is truly about. Another strength of this book is the world building. Now, a lot of times when we talk about world building, we're talking about how fantastical, how creative can you make this world and all of the elements that go into it. But what Patrick Rothfuss does really well, to me, is makes the world feel extremely lived in and realistic. The way he does this is he gets people. If you've ever lived in a small town, then you know that Noir and the Waystone Inn, the conversations that happen there are so true to life. He just gets it right. The squabbles, the gossip, the drama, it's all real. The way that it's more of a community than in a big city, even though they don't always get along, that they truly are trying to help each other, even though they're kind of talking bad about each other at the same time. All these things just wrap up into one big glob of character world building that is really special. So, should you read this book? Well, if you haven't read this book already, then I will say cautiously, yes. But you have to know first that if you do read this book and you like it and you want to continue, then you're going to have a case of literary blue balls. That's right, the third book is not out yet. So if you're not worried about that at all, then absolutely go check it out. If that does give you a little bit of pause, I do still recommend the book on its own merits. I think it's fine as a standalone story. It's worth it really just for the prose and the examination of Kvothe's character. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching Fantasy Talk, and we'll see you next time.